Good afternoon and welcome to Wavelength Webinars. We run these webinars monthly and they aim to provide you with access to the high-profile business experts and practitioners that we represent at Wavelength, so you can tune in and to listen to what they have to say on some of the leadership themes and challenges that are facing us today. Today's masterclass, we are joined by Steve Cadigan, and Steve is the former Senior Vice President of Talent at LinkedIn. He's a board member and he's a prolific keynote speaker, and he's probably one of the world's most influential thought leaders on culture and the future of work. And we're really excited to have him join us here today. Steve will be discussing with us what you can do to help your organisation's culture thrive and ultimately survive in this COVID-19 crisis. We are also joined by Matt White. Matt is an associate of Wavelength and he'll be hosting today's webinar. Matt will be taking your questions, so please do send them in through the GoToWebinar control panel. There's a drop-down menu where you can put in your questions and he will address them to Steve during the session. So I hope you enjoyed today's session. Thank you for joining, and I'll hand over to Matt.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sarah. Good afternoon, everybody. A glorious day in Brighton. We've just been talking about the beach and things like that. It's very busy down there, so I'm far better off in my study than I am on the beach. I'm secluding myself here, but I've got great company today in Steve Cadigan. Steve's talking to us from San Diego. I'm not even sure whether the weather's going to be better in San Diego than it is in Brighton today, Steve. So perhaps you can fill us in on that a little bit. So Steve's been a friend of Wavelengths for some time. We've met both in the US, and you've spoken with us a number of times in the UK, and for many of the people who've been members of the programs that Wavelength has run. I remember talking to you initially, right? You LinkedIn, you moved from 400 people to 4,000 people in your tenureship there, an architect of culture, and that's hopefully there'll be some questions on that and how you did that and how that stood you in certain stead for the kind of things that we're facing at the moment. You're now an advisor. You're on numerous boards, both startups, NGOs as well. Interesting enough, you also you define yourself as a talent hacker. I'm a golf hacker, and that's a bad thing, but I know that a talent hacker is a good thing. So that's where you talk about envisaging unique and creative approaches to inspire success in both individuals, teams, organizations. So you're a perfect person to talk to us today about some of the challenges that all leaders are facing at the moment. There's never been a more pressing need for inspirational approaches to talent and work environments and the future of work. But I guess also it's never been a more challenging job. So in hearing from you, we'll try and dive into as much detail as we can. We'll try and make it as practical as possible. As Sarah said, if you can put any kind of questions, reflections onto the chat, all those listening, maybe those listening have also got their own thoughts on the challenges that you're going through. It'd be great just to have a little mind on that as you're listening, to say, actually, I'd love Steve's input on this specific challenge or anything like that. So feel free to use the chat and the questions as we go through, and then we'll pick up on those. But Steve, I just want to kind of, I guess the opening question, one is, what have you been up to recently? Who you've been working with, and how has that changed since COVID as well? How's that impacted on your work, what you're focusing on, or what are you not doing now?
Yeah, it's just so fascinating, Matt, thinking about what's going on right now. I mean, in my personal life, I've, for the first time ever, had to negotiate with my kids for Wi-Fi bandwidth while they do their homeschooling or distract themselves with video games, which is how they're gathering now and chatting. But from a professional point of view, I woke up, like I think a lot of the folks attending today, about a few days into this whole stay-at-home mandate, and asked myself, oh my gosh, is everything I'm working on around the future work? And I've been working on a book now for about a year that's about ready to go to the publisher, and I had this moment of panic going, oh my God, is everything I've been working on, does it have any relevance in the future? And then I had a conversation with myself saying, which was, well, we don't really know what the future is going to be after this, but we have some indications it will be very, very different. So I've gone through weeks of just sort of poring over my material, going, does this really stand up? Am I going to be relevant? If I'm speaking at conferences, what does that look like in a world where there aren't any conferences? And I think that that's probably the thing that strikes me in my network of associates and organizations that I work with, is everyone's stepping back and asking really deep questions. Am I in the right role? Am I in a vulnerable industry? Am I in a vulnerable job? Those are always healthy things to face, but we're all facing it at the same time on a global level in every dimension of our lives. Having to live differently as a family unit, spending more time with people at home than probably we have. I've worked from home, I think, and you do as well, for probably the last 9 years. So this is not an unnatural act, but having the whole family unit here has been very different. So yeah, it's just been radical. Some things are the same, but a lot of things are so different.
So that is it. And you were talking about, you've been writing a book, and a book about the future of work, and like you say, you must have thrown that up in the air, ditched it a couple of times. What kind of themes are you writing about in the book, and are they still relevant? Did they stand the COVID test, as it were?
Right. So the two sections of the book are, what does the future look like for work for you as an individual, and then what does the work look like for you as an organization? And the themes are I think everyone's looking at work very, very differently. I think the notion of long-term employment in one place is breaking. And what I was hoping to try to reveal to people is that that's an okay outcome, that talent movement and higher turnover doesn't necessarily lead to bad outcomes. In the US, which is the economy I work in the most and I study the most, we have the highest amount of turnover, for example, in the last 15 years than at any point that we've been measuring turnover. And yet the profits are higher than they've ever been in the last 15 years. So one can't argue necessarily that this notion of turnover is a bad thing. And I go on to try to reveal to people, maybe we've undervalued new ideas and people bringing new ways of solving problems in an organization where there's high turnover. There's new ideas that are coming in and circulating new ways of solving problems, which is great. And maybe we've overvalued long-term tenure. And so one of the things that I talk about is that I think holds up, and most of the book does hold up, is this notion of safety used to be being stationary in one organization. And I believe safety in an uncertain world is movement, because movement gives me more knowledge and more insight. And that could be movement if I'm in a large organization. That could be movement within the organization where I'm learning new styles of leadership, new elements of the business. But if I'm moving from one vertical to another, I think that really holds up. But the biggest part of the book is just, hey, we need to be more agile. And guess what? We are all in a forced agility course on a global scale we've never seen before. And I think we're going to come out of this as a global community better, because I've been talking about the pace of change, and we need to always up our game and constantly grow and learn to be more relevant. But now it's just the fact that everything's changing, not just skills and technology, but how we do what we do is changing. And so this capability of adapting and adjusting, I think, is gaining even more relevance. So I sort of woke up one day and said, "Whew, I think most of my stuff stands up." But still, there's a lot to still discover. And I've been a webinar junkie for the last 3 months, and I saw one presenter say, "Beware the webinar that says this is going to forever change due to COVID," because no one really knows what's going to happen, on the other side of this, which is scary.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, I want to come back to the acceleration point as well when we a little bit more dive into that. One thing that I think is really on people's minds, our members and the people tuning in, is this idea of the kind of psychological safety at the moment. So we can look at organizations who are pivoting, we look at a business model pivoting, but the thing that really is on people's minds is actually, how safe do my people feel? The fear that they may have of their uncertain future. One area I wanted to kind of check in with you on is how do we get a barometer of that with people when we're on a screen here? Most of the people we're managing and leading via screen. How do we unpick the psychological safety of people and kind of get to grips with it so that we're actually looking after people? Have you got a thought on that?
Yeah, Matt, wow, that's such an important topic, I think. And we've been talking about this. I've been looking at psychological safety for a long time, and there's been a lot of research out of Harvard and Stanford, and Google even put some of that to work, saying that they found some of their highest performing teams had one common ingredient, and that was this notion of psychological safety. If we peel that back right now, and my perspective for leaders and looking at the reality that we're facing, I mean, I think we have a reason for us to be much more sensitive and concerned for our staff and their psychological safety, because it's not, we thought of it in terms of work, but now we've got people fearing potentially the safety of their elders, of their children, of their ability to continue employment, of income continuity, of affording the things that they were expecting to afford in a quote normal lifestyle. And so many of the normal elements of our lives have been challenged, and so many are still unknown. And so for me to ask you, my coworker or my direct report, to focus on work without first checking in on how are you doing, I think is a big oversight. And I think that's, this is one of the great elements I think that we're going to learn, I believe, out of this COVID reality, which is we really are forced to understand each other on a more human level. Yeah. And as someone put it, these are not my words, but we've been working with a human doing model, and now we have to focus on a human being model, which I think is a great way of thinking about it, which is every Zoom call that I've been on, every session with someone on the phone, how are you? How's your family? How are you? Is there anything I can do to help you first before we get to, hey, how's the quarterly number looking and how are the deliverables? And that, I mean, it's human nature for us to do that, but this merging of I'm in your house now, and I think it's enabling us to have more personal connection, which I really encourage people. Some of us have had there's work and then there's home. And now we've had this, I call it the merger is now complete. Like work life is now one. And for some companies, I just was talking to a company this morning called Coinbase, and I've been trying to get their head of human resources on the phone for some work that I wanted to do with them. And he says, sorry, we just implemented a full, from now on, work from home. And I said, so that's basically the pajama mandate is, been instituted that everyone can work from home. And so, but that's, wow, it's so extreme. And I think that the more that we can appreciate what someone's circumstances are, because we're not going to know, we can't pass them in the hallway. We don't have lunch with them like we used to. Yeah. We have to be more intentional to discover people's fears and try to help them work with those.
I mean, this is quite a skill you're talking about here as well. And it's also, I mean, you said that it's human nature to ask people how they are. We say that all the time. We say, how are you? What we don't do is we don't listen to the answer, or we hope that they say fine so that we can move on. So, but what I think you're saying as well is actually, if you get these days, particularly as a leader, if you're going to ask the question, listen to the answer, give enough time to really explore how someone is, because using it as a cursory greeting is no longer acceptable. What do you think? Is that fair enough?
Yeah, I think that's a good framework for people to think about. Being more intentional, being more present, and engaging in those conversations. And especially if that hasn't been natural for you or the natural course. I've worked on teams where whenever we had a meeting, the first thing we did was say, share a personal victory and share a professional victory, and then we go on. And I like that. I like that rhythm. And, some people that I'm talking to are starting meetings by saying, tell us two or three things that you've discovered working from home that surprised you. And that's not a lead for something good or something bad, just something different. And that's just a recognition right up front that we're in a different domain, and it's an opportunity to share best practices on how we can do that more effectively. You know, one of the things, for example, Matt, in my life, and we talked a little bit about this offline, the normal school day for my 5 kids is 7 or 8 hours away from the house, okay? Homeschooling at home is 2 or 3 max, because they don't have the between class, they don't have a lunch, they don't have the PE or recess that they may have. And so now, you know, I'm like, what, you're done with 3 hours? Like, don't you have a book to read or something to do? It's different. And it's not that they're losing out on an educational opportunity necessarily. They're losing out on some socialization or, you know, some group exchanges, but that's something I have to manage now that I wasn't managing before.
Yeah, so everyone's managing these kind of different dynamics. What we're asking people, what you're saying is we're asking our leaders to be really, really mindful of the check-ins, mindful of other people's kind of mental states, spot the signs, giving them time. How do we better look after leaders? Because we're expecting so much more. I'm talking to lots of leaders, and they're like, I'm on video, you know, 10 hours a day. I'm on screen. I'm more on than ever before. I'm trying to restructure my business at the same time as run it, doing it all virtually. I'm kind of, you know, I've got enormous uncertainty. Who's looking after the leaders? Any thoughts on, you know, if you were giving advice to an HR director or other leaders or other peers, how to support other leaders in this? What are you thinking? What advice would you give?
Yeah, well, let me add on to what you said around the strain for leaders. So leaders believe that their job is to sort of calm and help explain the future and help prepare people for what's next. Can't do that now. Very little. I can't reassure you that our business is going to be okay. I can't do that because our supply chain's been impacted or our customers have different needs right now. I can't do that, and that feels very uncomfortable. You know, the leaders that I'm talking to that I think are approaching this the right way is they're acknowledging with their leadership peers, we don't have all the answers. What we can try to do is demonstrate a concern and awareness in trying to find answers where you can, but also being honest that we're not going to have all the answers and we may not, but we are, you know, trying to do this. I think leaders need to think differently about discovering the rhythm that works for them. I don't think most people 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 or whatever I don't think that works right now for all the reasons of, especially if you have kids at home or you have employees or workers who have kids at home, that schedule needs to adjust somehow, you know? And I think we could very quickly fall victim to this 24/7 cycle. And I think it's carving out time for you to, you know, to get centered, wherever that inspiration is, and acknowledging that you need that, and that's okay. And one of the interesting things that I've done is researching new economies, and one of the new economies is this whole fear economy. We have the first unicorn in the fear economy is this company called Calm, which is a meditation app. It's the first billion-dollar company that reached that valuation prior to all this, but they're seeing enormous jump in people taking to meditation, for example. So, you know, I think we should all be trying to find a rhythm and recognizing a new rhythm's probably necessary, you know. And one of the quotes I saw from a coworker in a piece she did around the future of culture, which I love, Sue Bathanis, who works at Mariposa, she said, if you think about this notion of culture as generally defined as the way we do things around here, she asked the question, which I thought was great, like, what is here now? Like, what is that? And that is also the soup that leaders are struggling in, is like, what is the work environment? What is in play, and what are the norms? Because we're all establishing new norms of interaction and engagement. And I think some experimentation should be, I invite leaders to experiment a little bit and try it out and share lessons with your fellow leaders as we go through this, right?
I love that thought as well, but you know, actually maybe that is a thing for everyone to take away, which is that sentence, the way we do things around here is kind of, right, now's the time to pull it apart and redefine all of it. redefine the way
Yeah.
we do things, and redefine the here and put them together, and actually start to experiment with that and see
Yeah.
what your people actually want that sentence to really mean as we
Yeah.
emerge out.
Yeah, you know, I think some things that I've seen that are really just warm my heart is some of the leaders are doing the bring your pet to the video conference session, or virtual happy hours, or bring your kids to the video conference, or a who's got the best COVID hairstyle contest on the call. Just all that stuff. Humor is the ultimate depressurizer and de-stressor in an environment like we're in right now. And if it's not your natural, someone on your team has that skill. So turn them loose. That's what I would say. Turn them loose. We need a good laugh. We need to take the stress off, and that would be, it sounds catty. It sounds, and I can say that as Steve Cadigan. It sounds catty, and it sounds trite, but I'm telling you that is sorely desired, I think, for people who are we have more anxiety than we can even measure right now.
Yeah.
It's hard.
And just there was something that a quote that I picked up earlier this week, which is what gets attention might not be important, but what is important might not be getting enough attention as well. So with that in mind, anything that you're picking up on, is there anything falling through the cracks here? People are pivoting. People are making decisions very, very quickly. They are rallying around. They're partnering differently at the moment. But what if anything is falling through the cracks that's important but not getting enough attention?
Gosh, Matt, that's such a good reflection on what we're facing right now. And I think we have the first time in our lives, the ultimate distraction environment, the ultimate potentially anxiety-causing environment. It's very tempting. It's very easy, or the seduction is very high to get overly serious or overly intense, because this out of fear, the fight or flight thing. And I think that the best advice I've got when I'm thinking about how can we best address this is just to fall back on something that I've been talking about for years, and we've talked about this a lot, which is we really need to ask a lot more than maybe we've done before. We need to really over communicate. If I'm seeing teams that their regular rhythm was we're going to meet once a month, they're meeting once a week. If I'm having a direct report that we used to meet every other week, sometimes we're meeting once or twice a week. So doubling the frequency of communication, because that's going to give you more intelligence and more insight and more opportunity to help others. And I think that's where you're going to surface what's really important. I mean, I think that's the most critical thing leaders should be focused on now. What is important? I think achieving psychological safety, it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. No one is going to be productive for you if they're worried about their family's safety and health, or access to medical care, or whatever it is. And that bucket's big. But I'll also say this, Matt, and I think this is really, really important. When we looked at the last, so you and I have lived through 9/11, the dot-com bubble bursting, let's see, SARS, the H1N1, and the 2008 banking collapse. Okay, that's the last big one. And again, this is sort of in my webinar junkie state. I got some really interesting feedback from one presenter recently who said, in 2007 and 9, during that last economic crisis that we had, what came out of that was, if we look at all the unicorns, 300 or so billion-dollar valued companies today, 30 of them, or 30 or 40 of them, came out of that crisis, were born. And those include some technology companies that are in my neighborhood: Airbnb, Square, Slack, Dropbox, Glassdoor. And so these are times where, yes, it can be highly anxiety causing, but there are also times of great innovation, because it turns out that in times of significant change and massive disruption, we slow down, we focus, we get a lot more intense, and we discover things that we're forced to discover that maybe we didn't do before. Like any executive in the world right now who is like, I'm not sure about the whole work from home. If I can't see you doing it, I'm not sure you're doing the work.
Yeah.
You don't have a choice now. Sorry, everyone's got to work from home. And you've got to get comfortable quickly with trust and, and building a new measurement for how your team is achieving whatever they need to achieve. So it's a different paradigm that we're all struggling to create right now. But when I think about what you just asked, that's how I frame it, which is, okay, I need to ask more, I need to get more feedback, I need to increase my cycles. And the big thing in the 80s was MBWA, management by walking around. Well, how do you do that now?
Yeah.
You gotta, Zoom bomb people and come in, but just go in and do the check-in with people. I mean, that's so important.
I think you might have just coined the management by zooming about method. I think I think that's really important. I was reflecting on that, and we're checking in with lots of people. I think lots of people are saying actually most meetings we're having, they're important. We're making important decisions. We're trying to move things very, very quickly. And I was talking to my neighbour the other day, who's an HR director, and he was saying maybe one of the things that people are missing is the smaller meeting. The meetings that don't have the leader in them. The ones that happen, where people within teams are meeting people within other teams, and they're getting that stuff done on a regular basis. That's the underlying rhythm of a business. And that is not happening at the moment because people are having the wider strategic meetings, but there's not enough of those kind of more casual meetings that are happening lower in the teams. I was wondering whether that's a reflection, and whether there's a movement to have people actually pushing more and more towards non-leader-led meetings in order that work gets done at a different kind of level.
Yeah, it's interesting, Matt. I've not observed that particular dimension, but what I have observed is a radical increase of peer-to-peer learning. And the leader, you're right, the leader is going to be tapped, particularly if they're in a larger organization with a significant number of direct reports. And everyone's on many virtual teams right now. You have your direct team, then you have all kinds of other peripheral teams that you're on. So how do we do that? And I think there is, and this is, I hope, one of the best forcing functions of coronavirus as we get through this is the increased humanization of technology, and how do we connect in a meaningful way without being face-to-face in person, right? This has been the big challenge I've had with technology for the last 5 years, which is, you can't tell me that trust is built better through a text than through a face-to-face interaction, that I can do it. But what's interesting, and I'm reading a book right now, Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell, where he really gets into our human default to trust, even when faced with all kinds of counter information that maybe someone is lying or someone's not being truthful to us, is I think that body language is not, in Western cultures, it's something that we look at and something that we can sort of feel, and it's been a part of my repertoire for lots of different reasons. But when I worked in Asia, it meant nothing to me. It was a completely useless skill because the body language was not one I was familiar with at all. I don't even know by our standards if there is body language in some countries. But I think that trying to find that sixth sense that we have as leaders, we've been stripped of that, and we have to build. And this is what I think is going to help us. We're going to have to build this capability of, as leaders, like, we're going to have to learn to recruit without actually meeting the person in person. And some companies have been doing that for a while. It's not new. And maybe where this goes is we start solving things like unconscious bias. Maybe we start interviewing on the phone and we don't see someone's face. And we put our biases at rest a little bit more. And maybe this is a diversity and inclusion opportunity, Trojan horse, if you will, for us to address.
Completely, because I think the workplace has been for many decades, almost like kind of a cultural barriers against D&I. I mean, let's face it. It's been a male egocentric bastion over many decades, and and gradually, not fast enough, we've been breaking that down. And this surely is an opportunity to sort of really kind of, like you say, Trojan horse that, because actually this is bringing out different kind of learning styles, etc. Is that your take on trying to accelerate that with your future of work hat on? How do we use this kind of technology, this kind of work and practice to really accelerate our D&I model?
Well, I'm working with a company right now that's based in Boston called Filtered AI, and they have built a way to measure, and it's for technical recruiting, which, as anyone knows, is like unicorn hunting, looking for technical talent, software engineers. They've built a model that's been accelerated in this time to help you recruit externally and to be able to have people go through tests and go through online assessments and just eliminate some of the biases that are there. But what I feel COVID's presented to us, Matt, which is really interesting, is let's take diversity from a generational perspective. Every company I talked to in the world in the last 2 years, what's the biggest pain point you have as a leader? Oh, that millennial generation. And while I reject strict generational definitions, that the knee jerk for all the change they've seen in the workforce has been blamed to this younger generation, which I remind them, those are your children, by the way, that you raised. And secondly, you can't tell me that if you had the visibility to choice that generation has to new opportunities, to see what companies are paying and what benefits they're giving, that you can't tell me you would stay in the same company 25 years if you had the bevy of opportunity information that they have in front of them right now. So it's just a different, it's a different reality that people are facing. But I really think, if we step back and we take a look at, what you're talking about, I think, it's time for us to really consider a new way of being and engaging.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing as well, people on some of these webinars and people who are running teams, is that we've built our workplaces around the extrovert model, and in many ways this is allowing the quieter voices hopefully to shine forth. This is a very egalitarian viewing
it's
platform.
It's the introvert's dream come true, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
absolutely. And in actual fact, what you were saying earlier is when a leader or anyone else is more proactive in pulling the voice out, because there's no requirement to dominate in this, then maybe that's where. And so this is something that we must be tapping.
That's so true. And I've seen other things that companies are doing right now, which is one of them that I'm working with is leveraging their military veterans who have seen, incredibly stressful circumstances in their own lives. If they've done active duty, they've seen death, they've experienced it, and they tend to be generally calming influences in the world. And I've worked with some of these people in prior roles, and it's shocking to be how I'm ready to jump, nails in the ceiling, and they can just pull you down and calm you. Similarly, from a generational perspective, I think the generations that have been through some of the crises, not of this magnitude, no one's seen this before, but they have been through a SARS, or they've been through 9/11, or they've been through, significant, company changes and staff reductions through the 2008 banking crisis. They may offer some perspective to help ease the freak out reaction to folks who've not seen it before. And here's the other thing that I initially got very worried as we were entering this phase of companies having to evaluate what jewelry are we going to throw overboard to keep the boat afloat, like impossible decisions that I feel like we have a first generation of leaders that have not faced anything of this magnitude, that have never had to let anyone go, never even had to contemplate that decision. They're building, unfortunately, you don't want to have to face making those decisions, but that will make you stronger over the long term. That I think will give you enormous maturity to have to face some of those hard decisions and how you handle those. And Matt, we talked about this. I feel as leaders right now, the pressure is really high because I feel the opportunity, given the employees' heightened sensitivity on every dimension, the opportunity for leaders to have an unforgivable moment is very high. Doing the quick knee-jerk decision, maybe we're going to reduce staff, without first considering 30 other cost-cutting measures that you could take before letting someone go. and then communicating that. Like, you know, there's two great examples out there, both companies in California that I'm familiar with. One is a scooter company called Bird, based out of Santa Monica, California, which is less than 3 years old. It became the fastest company to reach unicorn status, billion-dollar valuation. This is just a scooter company in Santa Monica, California. And then on the other end of the spectrum is Airbnb. Now, when Bird announced that they were letting people go, it was via a Zoom invitation. That it wasn't clear why you were being invited. It wasn't on cycle with a normal Zoom rhythm. It wasn't clear who was leading the meeting. Everyone's videos were turned off and muted, and a recording was played saying, if you were on this call, your job has now been eliminated. And due to circumstances beyond our control, we're very sorry. Your last day of employment will be this, and you're going to get an email. And some people's systems were shut off in the middle of the Zoom call, okay? And so no one knew, well, who is this person? Why isn't leadership standing up? Why isn't the CEO, this guy Travis, why isn't he in front of all of us telling us this? And so you have example A, and then you have example B, where the CEO of Airbnb, in a very heartfelt communication, head in hand says, we have to let some of our friends go, but we're going to do everything we can to find them new jobs. We're going to give them benefits that no company has ever given them. We're going to accelerate some of their stock vesting, which is a big part of compensation in a lot of the tech companies. No one's ever done that before. They went way above and beyond, to the point where my entire LinkedIn feed was stuffed with people saying, and they built a whole software engine to help people hire the people they're letting go. So example A, Bird, that will be unrecoverable for them. Good luck hiring somebody after that. You've just revealed the quality of your leadership is like 0.0. And then you've got Airbnb letting more people go, gaining more respect in the process, right? Those are incredible examples.
Yeah. And this is interesting because it goes back to your point that you're making earlier, and I think, you know, your advice on this for the leaders listening as well, or anyone listening, about over-indexing on transparency, because there's this idea here that that actually kind of realism is better than reassurance. That in actual fact, reassurance doesn't necessarily work. People need that dose of realism and understanding that, But how is that playing out really at the moment? I mean, are we trying to reassure people, or would you advise people to actually just all the cards on the table, over-index on reality and be truthful, and versus actually try and nurture people too much?
The answer is yes. Sort of in a way that's true to yourself. I mean, if you go to a radical extreme that's different from who you really are, you're going to freak people out. So if you're more cautious, deliver some reassurance, but also deliver the appreciation and the recognition that you don't know some answers. Here's one thing, and even in my experience, my last head of HR role at LinkedIn with my boss, the CEO, Jeff Weiner, we had something really awful happen. We had a bunch of Russian hackers we found come in and steal passwords, and it was devastating to us. And it could possibly have put our IPO filing at risk. He had to get in front of the company and deliver a mea culpa. We made some mistakes. We're going to do everything we can to fix it. I'm very sorry. We're taking a hit right now, but I think we're going to get stronger. We're learning a lot. And he was very uncomfortable doing that, because my model of a leader is you are infallible, you are strong, you have the answers, you don't admit, fault, you sort of, explain it away. He did that, and he said, about 10 minutes later, he called me in his office and said, you got to come in here. And I said, what? He said, look at my email. In the 10 minutes from leaving the conference room where I did that to here, I have more emails saying, I have so much respect that you just did that. Thank you for being real, that you're human. And he wasn't crying, or he wasn't that's not his style, but people knew that was not really easy for him. And they appreciated and respected him more for that. And I think we lose sight of that. I think sometimes that showing our humanness actually builds belief in us and builds followership, and that we have, and this is, a point I really want to land with the audience today. If you can look at what we're dealing with right now and see the opportunity to come out stronger, to see the opportunity to say, we don't want to go back to what was. That's not achievable. And I think the longer you hold on to that, I think the harder a time you're going to have to work through this. But that the new is going to be better for all of us, and work towards that and use this as an opportunity. So again, out of my playbook from my mergers and acquisition days, one of the most turbulent experiences you could have as an employee is getting your company bought and acquired. And I lived that life integrating people for 4 years at Cisco. And what we looked for were problems in the process, because every time someone had a problem, hey, we heard you're relocating us over here. We would go, okay, well, let's look into it. We would find out the information was false. We prove it to them. We promise them. And they go, oh, thank you. Or, oh, my doctor is not on your medical plan. You're screwing me. Well, okay, hang on. And so what happened was we found those are opportunities for us to build trust. And I think that's what this can be for people. In the true measure of, in the deepest, darkest times, people find out what we're made of. And now's the chance for you to find your path. Is it a reassurance path? Is it a over transparent path? Whatever that is if it's true to you, you need to play that, but towards something better, because you've got a chance to really show them what you're made of now.
And I think, this captures a point that we were talking about earlier, and about acceleration as well, because it's accelerating our opportunity to do something if we choose to see something as an opportunity. And you and I were both remarking about Mark Manson's blog the other day. He was actually quoting Lenin. I've never thought I'd quote Lenin or anything like this, but he was saying, in fact, there's a Lenin quote saying, there are some decades where nothing happens, and some weeks where decades happen. And that seems to have been the case here. So talking about acceleration, and there's lots of quite well publicized elements around acceleration, around partnership and innovation, etc. But what we were talking about is the acceleration of relationships. And as the design of culture is based on relationships, you were talking about trust being accelerated very quickly, but also about strong relationships suddenly getting much stronger, but also kind of weaker relationships being pulled apart, the acceleration of that, both in the workplace and at home, which is a real testing kind of a platform for any kind of change. So just thinking about that kind of acceleration of strong and weak relationships in terms of culture for us. What are the watch outs there? What are the implications on the workplace for this kind of relationship acceleration in your view? And how do leaders where might leaders focus on this, or what might they be mindful of?
Yeah, the velocity of that, Matt, is so, and Mark Mason just puts it so well. And I feel like, we could have a decade in a week, and I feel like we've had a few weeks like that, and someone put it like someone just hit the fast forward button like 5 to 10 years, just really, really fast. I think that I fall back when I hear that question, Matt, to just the fundamentals, which is this is about trust. This is about relationships. This is about investing the time in doing that. This is about holding on to what's true to you as a leader. And, it gets back to the over-indexing on connection, not just communicating, but connecting really to people and what matters. And I think the speed is a concern right now. It's been an issue. Every organization in the world, if you look at every consulting company on the planet right now, whether it's McKinsey, Bain, Boston Consulting Group, Ernst & Young, Accenture, all these things, you know what the #1 business for them in the last 10 years is? It's digital transformation. That's what every organization is trying to say. We're going to need to be more digital. We need to use technology to find more efficiencies. Well, it just happened last quarter. Digital transformation just happened, and people, are having to, double down and invest in, technology that allows the work from home if they haven't already, and that. The speed of that, I think, is we're still reeling from that, Matt. I'm not sure how this is going to land, honestly, but new norms need to be established on, intentionally connecting more is sort of where I fall back on this one, and not being overwhelmed by the technology. Like, this is a business of humans being, not humans doing and not technology doing. So let's have those conversations to make sure that we're really focused on the individual and how we optimize with this new reality together, even though things are still quite uncertain.
Yeah, okay. And I want to move into kind of a last section a little bit. I mean, it'd be great to have a few more questions. If anyone's got any reflections on what we've said so far as well, and so actually here's what I think. Just pop them on the chat and in the question boxes as well. But there's a few things coming up about redesigning our culture, our future, our work, etc. Because the reality here, the human reality, is that we will probably revert back to norm as much as possible. That's what we like. It's habit. We'll try and claw back the old familiar ways. Just that's the way it's going to go in theory and in practice. So, what action do you think we should be taking now to make sure that we can kind of tap and bottle the great working practice or the great cultural elements that we're highlighting at the moment, so that we don't go back and in 18 months' time or 2 years' time think we just didn't take the opportunity that we should have done then? What should we be doing now? What should our listeners be gathering around now, and how might they be spending their time to kind of make sure they're prepared for sustaining something good out of this?
Yeah, Matt, a lot of that depends on how long this, notion of, we have to shelter in place plays out. And I think from my perspective, the longer this goes, I think the more likely new norms are going to set, because, we've been wanting to break the chains. We want to go back to the way it's been. So, this, several years ago, one of my boys was involved in a horrific accident. A car smashed him against the wall. And as we were talking to the doctors afterwards, I found out something about the human body, which I didn't know. And he's fine today and doing great. But when the car pinned him against the wall, what happens normally if you're hit by a car is that you're hit and then your body organs figure out how to go back together quickly. If you're pinned by a car for an extended period of time, your organs lose in seconds and minutes the ability to reconfigure where they were supposed to be. They don't know. And that happened to my son. So we had to do a fair number of surgeries to force the organs to get back to where they should be. I think the same is true for a business or an organization. The longer the impact of separation from what was, I think the more challenging it will be to revert. So I'm encouraged for those of you that are in places where a change is needed, and a new norm will be really beneficial. But I think some of the practices that I'm suggesting people, as we start to slowly, loosen, like we're loosening restrictions, not because things are necessarily getting better. If you notice this on a global level, restrictions are getting loosened because our patience is hitting that point of saturation where I'm willing to take the risk because I need to, maybe there's a financial pressure, economic pressure, or social pressure to go back. Not because there's science backing that choice. Even in California here, they've changed the requirements for what it takes for a county to open back up several times in 1 week. It used to be you can't have a single death from COVID for 2 months, and then it moved to you can't have an increase in deaths over a 14 period, in a span of 1 week. So, I think it's interesting how this is going to play out, such that those old habits are going to be, the bad habits are going to be challenged. And similarly, good habits are going to be challenged, that we want to revert to, and I think companies, it's going to force us to have more of a conversation around this, like who we are and how we do things around here. If it's really important to us, let's have that conversation and let's continue to be able to, surface the value and the critical element of this to us as an organization, right?
Yeah, and just tapping into that as well, and I'm hoping that is someone at your door who should be there, or you're being burgled at the moment while you're on a webinar, and I don't want to be responsible for that, but
yeah, well, see, that's the beauty. Like right now, our audience can see, Matt, you have a very fluid design of your background there, and I have a very straight line. Everything's kind of measured. Now that's not really indicative of my style because my wife actually organized that, and I don't know who did yours, but yes, we have someone at the door here. The dogs are barking. It's just reality has intruded on my webinar.
I think mine is one of in the old adages, if you throw enough crap against the wall, some of it will stick occasionally. But I think that's what that is. Just on that final point about that kind of redesign of culture as well. Any the leadership qualities that are emerging. You once said about one of your old bosses, John Chambers at Cisco, saying this is when your real leaders emerge. Leadership is not a title, is it? It emerges out of people. The natural leadership emerges. What are the natural qualities in leaders that you hope are going to emerge? The top 2 or 3 that you think are going to sustain the opportunity here.
Yeah, I think an increase in trust and comfort level with leading from without having to see the work is getting done. I hope that that's a skill that improves, and if you don't trust someone can do work when you're not watching them, maybe you hired the wrong person, or maybe you need to work on your own dimensions of being able to trust people. That when I think about this, that's one. I think the ability to build connection quicker with an individual, like get right to the root of that. That's going to be so hard, but I think we're having to have those personal conversations now. The best outcome of this COVID reality is that I'm in your house, you're in my house. You're seeing me as an executive. If you're working for me, you see me as an executive, have to fight for space with my kids and my spouse in the house. It's humanizing me before you. And I think that, perspective for some leaders that there's a rigid define and seeing the value of the blend being okay, and maybe you're even more respected or more credible as a human than some sort of infallible, robotic leader. I think those are the things that I think of that are really strong.
That's great, and I think there's one other thing that I'm going to add to that, which is just into what you were saying earlier, and some of the other things that we've been working on, is that the leader who can help the teams kind of recreate in their day space, space to reflect, space. It's because the workplace actually has space in it. We often think it doesn't, but it does, because it has the commute, it has the trip to the bathroom, it has the trip between meeting rooms, it has the serendipity of being in the lunch queue or something like that. It does have space, and we haven't been able to recreate that necessarily in the home life, as it were, yet. So I think leaders who can design that into their working practice, in addition to what you're saying about, the transparency, the trust, that level of empowerment, I think that would be a really profound skill in leadership.
Yeah, absolutely, man, absolutely.
I think you and I were talking about, actually just kind of summarizing elements to it. I think what you're talking about, you've mentioned brilliantly around kind of, you can't plan this. The word unprecedented has been used an unprecedented amount of times in the last however many months, but you can still plan for the unpredictable. I think that's a big takeout from me from this as well. Working on
that's right. That's right. Yeah, and Matt, let me take a second to expand on that, because that's a big part of my book too, which is this notion of, in a world where the future is more unknown than ever before, and in a world where we know things are going to change. Okay, I think for an individual, what you know may not be as important as what you can know. And what I mean by that is, I need people here that can grow and learn and adjust to a reality where my business is going to adjust, the market's going to adjust, and I need people who can do that. So that's why I think a more fluid workforce, the people changing jobs, is not scary to me. That's great. And by the way, a more fluid workforce is also a workforce that has a greater network, because they know more people and they can bring more to the table. That's number one. And secondly, for organizations that are really thinking hard around control, this is really a good lesson for the fact that if we as an organization are going to be measured by how quickly we can adapt. So I need people who can adapt quickly. you know, and who can learn quickly. And what I'm seeing, and I started to see this before COVID even, the way people are measuring talent in the interview process is, yes, I want to know what you know, but I want to know how big is your network, and I want to know demonstration of all these new things you've learned and applied quickly. And that, you know, the good news, we're all being forced to have to face that. I mean, companies are having to pivot left and right. Individuals, I had 3 calls yesterday with people saying, I'm not sure I'm in the right domain. Can you help me map out a pivot for my career? Yeah. Which, you know, I'm excited to do. And there's, you know, anyone who's contemplating a pivot, the best advice I can give you is a 180-degree pivot is really hard, but a 90-degree pivot is less hard. And, you know, leverage what you know, but take on things you don't know, and then slowly move your way in that direction. But that's when I look at the measure, the strength that organizations are benefiting from and individuals is we're all having to learn how to be more flexible and agile as an individual and as an entity. And that's only going to benefit us as we move forward.
Yeah, and that's a really powerful point. It's picking up one of the themes in this, which is we're very good at reverting to what we know, but this is much more about reverting to what we don't know, or reverting to what is unclear. We need to be much more comfortable with that. I mean, I love your idea of being specific about how much you might have to pivot, because often, you know, often you think it's that way, but actually, if you're much more specific about, okay, to what level of degree,
that's right.
Is a very, very powerful point. I thought your points about the way we do things around here needs to fundamentally change, and picking that apart, I think that's, you know, having a go at redefining all aspects of that sentence is very specific as well. And I think the other thing about recognizing that we're kind of going through many of these changes in all aspects of our life means that this is hard work and it needs attention. And kind of what I'm also hearing though is people are way more honest through this medium than we think they're going to be.
That's right.
We used to think this is a barrier like this, but in actual fact, coaching sessions that people are having, they're more open, they're more transparent. So kind of tapping that as a leader and kind of making, you know, pulling that honesty out is much easier. Mm-hmm. Opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, if you bring to this experience that we're all going through the mindset of where are there opportunities, for example, you don't have to look far on the internet to find a story of a business that voluntarily pivoted to create some PPE solution or some, you know, testing of new medicine for no charge. And on the other end of the spectrum, people who are sending their lobbyists to the government so that they can charge exorbitant amounts for something that doesn't cost them very much. And you've got all these extremes, and that's why I love, you know, I had a chance to do something I've never done before, which is record a graduation speech to the students of the business school at University of San Francisco. And my mandate was something inspirational. I looked around like, this is a nuclear winter, you know, train wreck on top of a car crash, on top of a, you know, plane crash for finding a new job right now. It's just not available. But, you know, then I sort of revert back to what we all have right now is the best set of data around how leaders and companies are handling this. Are you giving back to the community, or are you trying to take advantage of the opportunity that the community's hurt? Are you mindful and caring of your employees in this time? And, you know, one company I know said, we're going to a 4-day work week. Just, you know, boom. You know, we don't want you to fret. We are worried about the fragility of your, you know, anxiety-ridden lives right now. So that's what we're going to do. And great. So that experimenting with things like that. But we have now a portfolio. I was telling these graduates, you can see now data that was never available before on a global scale, so that when things do revert back to, I mean, no jobs out there is temporary. That will change. So when it does, now you've got data that you can make the best amount of data ever available to a job-seeking generation, you know?
Brilliant. Steve, I'm going to hand back to Sarah, but from my point of view, thank you so much for that. It was a great conversation, lots and lots of practical stuff as well, and it's been, you know, really valuable. Thank you very much, Steve. Good to speak to you.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Yeah, great. Just to reiterate that, thank you so much, Steve. Really fantastic session. Thank you, Matt, as well, for hosting us. And thank you for you joining at home. I hope you enjoyed this session as well. And if you'd like to engage Steve to come and talk to your organisation, then there'll be information in the follow-up note that I'll be sending out. Also in there, you'll find details of our next webinar, which is on the 24th of June, and that is with David Pencil, who is the former CEO of the Guardian Media Group, and he'll be talking to us about how to run a more agile, customer-centric organisation. Yeah, thanks again. Stay safe, stay well, and until next time, see you soon.
Thank you.